Hi everyone, it's Jerry. I have an instructive game to share with you from the 2025 FIDE World Junior Chess Championship. This was a round 6 game, played on March 2nd. On the white end, Pranav V, playing against Emin Ohanyan. Alright, on board we see the Levitsky Attack, an early pin in the position. Also, maybe ready to swipe the knight if it goes to its favorite square. Now there's a downside with this early bishop development. Vulnerable square, b2 pawn, unprotected, and that has black's attention. Quickly pinpoints it with the queen. And how to defend? Well, in the game it's b3. Not the only way to play. b3 is committal, for sure. 2 holes created on the queen side. You could go with queen c1, and next up c4, but white goes with b3. He's going to just take a little bit of care over these weaknesses is all. And in a little bit from now, we're going to see that b3, in fact, is purposeful in supporting a c4 advance. All right, from here, a little bit more development. Tension here between the light square bishops. And the follow-up bishop b4 check. I think it's a worthwhile check to flick in. A little test here for white. Are you going to block with the knight? If you're doing that, it's not getting to its favorite square anymore. Also, bishop c3 could be an irritating move. Not so fast. White here plays c3, kicks the bishop back. White eventually wants to play with c4 and knight c3. That'll be the ideal setup. Both knights on their favorite squares. So we get these exchanges here, the bishops. Black is okay taking on these doubled f pawns, has a greater grip over the center square e4 now. A nice jump eventually for one of the black knights. Bishops exchanged as well. Castles. Knight d7, where else? And c4. Again, destination here is the c3 square. We're not just developing the knight to this square here and being content with connected knights. Nope. This is the point here with c4, the b3 move justifying this advance in a spot to simply recapture. So it wasn't really how it played out, at least this far. This queen, the inclusion of queen b6 and b3 didn't really inconvenience white. Follow up castles. And from here we see knight c3. If there's the capture here on d5, the best way or the better way to recapture would be with a knight. And white has this majority, but the f-pawn plays a role in holding up any e4 ideas. Some pressure here maybe later on. There could be an f4 move as long as e4 wouldn't be a great response. All right, in this one we do not see the capture on d5. We continue to develop, improve our pieces, and we're definitely not thinking about taking the knight here, straightening out black structure. We continue to improve. In fact, there is a weakness with this last move, this d7 square. White hops in the center, knight e5. Fork threat, easy enough to defend. Central rook, cuts out the knight jump, supports d5. From here, knight d3. This is really the dream square for the knight. Both knights sit really well, tucked right behind these pawns. Another rook central, and we're 15 moves in. It's really the next 15 moves I'm going to be focusing on primarily. The last 15 is a whole lot of white collecting material. So these next 15 moves are really where the game is won. Now, the follow-up from here is knight to e2. So once more, this idea to take the knight, you never really want to do this. For one, black could straighten out the structure. It's also looking at the other capture, sort of justifying the rook placement on d8 in some way. But in general, you don't want to take the knight. You straighten out the structure, and you would be robbing this knight of a fantastic square. It's going to have to find a new home. So white is going to work around this knight. He ducks this exchange, and nearby there could be this idea of f3. Knight's going to have to find a different home. Now, the follow-up from here is a5. How the computer wants to play it here, there's a sharp, an energetic reply here available to black. You'd really have to crunch the numbers well on this one. Computer here wants to play it with f5, or excuse me, c5. And how is this playing out exactly? Well, after c5, f3 is there, yes, but here's the thing. The knight doesn't have to move. If the knight moves, white is simply collecting a pawn, and there's no compensation for black. Here's the detail, though. If c5 and f3, black knight doesn't have to move. Black has this capture on d4, and if the knight is captured, we have d takes e4. The black pieces are springing to life. We have two invasive pawns, and now white is in a spot where, with best play, you have to give the material back. It's going for this capture on d4, the knight getting swiped next. Here's the thing, if you try and save the knight in this position, there's d3. It's a two pawns versus knight imbalance. And there's also another trick up black's sleeve. Let's say this knight in this position went to d4, wants to go for a rook sacrifice, an exchange sacrifice. White is up a rook here, but black is considered winning. It's calling this minus 1.5. Big center, to say the least, here for black. Now, that's a very sharp move. Would really have to be calculated well here, kicking off with c5 at this moment. In the game, it is a5. Follow up queen c2. Healthy move with g6. We got our flight square. And now c5. So the evaluation right around here, it's looking at it close to +1. Some value here with the c5 pawn for sure, established in black's camp. Black's reply, queen c7. Now normally, if the structure is not doubled like this, the response to c5 eventually will be to strike d4, e6 pawn going to e5. There's no e pawn, though, to do this. How exactly to put this pawn to work? It's sort of an ineffective pawn with how this one plays out. Once the pawn is established on the queen side, this is where the attention is now going to shift. And, this extra support, this grip over the e4 square isn't really seen as an advantage, or any great positive, I should say, for Team Black. So the attention from here is going to be on the queen side. And much of the attention, to be a bit more exact, is going to be on who can create a passed pawn. We're going to try to create a passed pawn and then work with that passed pawn. So let's see how play develops. Rook b1, rook a8. And from here we see a4. You could also play with b4 straight away, but maybe white did not want to allow rook a3. It is an active move. I'm not saying it's a great move, but by playing first a4 here and only next b4, after these captures, there isn't going to be a rook a3 idea. A4 pawn is clearly interfering with that. What other move can black play here besides the move in the game, rook e to b8? If there's this response to a4, let's say black goes with a b pawn advance, b5 or b6 for that matter, there's a couple of responses available to white. You could take on b5 and then follow up with b4. This is a tough one to assess. It's saying it's better for white, but we're in for a long game, it feels, at least, with these connected passers, and a lot of maneuvering is likely to ensue from here. Another approach would be to meet b5 or b6 with the capture on b6. But in the end, what are we really saying as black if we're playing with that b pawn advance? It'd be like we're saying we're okay with these two things here, and that is one, taking on a backward c pawn, not really a good idea, and two, we would be giving white a passed a pawn. This rook pawn is a nightmare for a knight. So probably not a good idea to enter a line like this. And playing with the b pawn, in short, you're signing up for a backward c pawn and giving white a passed a pawn. So no b5, at least at this moment. First, rook e to b8, in comes b4, and now we see b5, maybe with the hope of exchanging all of these pawns, and in that way there won't be any passed pawn, but that's not how it ends up playing out. There's a nice little move flicked in here, and the queenside is going to be disrupted. The move played here is first f3, flushes the knight away from this c3 square. White wants to have this move available for the knight. Knight falls back to f6 here. Now we see the capture on b5, and in the game, black recaptures with the pawn. If you take with the rook would immediately be challenged. And after it falls back, there's b5, and what's happening? By force, there will be a passed c pawn. Both sides end up with a passed pawn, but white will have the stronger passed pawn, a connected passed pawn. Also, you pretty much would have to take here on b5 at this stage. Otherwise, we're getting in b6 and having a passed pawn that's just 2 steps away from queening, which would be more valuable than this one here, which is 3 steps away. So either way, better for white, a variation like this. Black's response in this game to the capture on b5 is with the pawn. And before a4 could be flicked in there, creating a connected passer, we get the capture on a5. This pawn will now be a target. Big difference here between these two pawns. Connected, not connected. Follow up, knight c3. And from here we have b4, knight a4, and the follow-up from here, rook takes a5. Now, how the computer wants to play it here, there's another really sharp line. After the move in the game, rook takes a5, the knight hops into b6. Some pressure on d5 cuts off the rook from defending b4. Here's how the computer wants to play it. Pretty lengthy line I'm going to be putting on right now. Wants to go with knight takes on a5. Now, you can't respond to knight a5 with knight b6 here. After this knight capture on a5, there's a pin on the c file, so knight b6 here, there's rook takes knight. If white follows up and tracks down this b pawn, this is a really irritating knight. Look at the pressure black would have here. Look at the compensation black would have for the pawn. All sorts of activity. Both rooks observing both knights. Pawn ready to fall, a fork nearby here, as well as here. Now, it says with best play, white needs to challenge this piece as soon as possible. It says best here is to dive into b6. There's no time to land a fork on a3, for instance, because the knight could take the rook and be on the queen. This is the top line from here, one where we exchange a bunch of material, and eventually black tracks down this b pawn. It calls it level. So that was a really sharp line right there, kicking off with the knight here recapturing on a5. In this game, it is the rook capture. Knight gets to hop into b6 in this case. Follow up rook a3, queen d2. If you capture away on b4, in the end, you're going to drop e3. So the queen steps aside, secures e3, creates more pressure on b4. Now, in this position, black plays b3, and we're approaching the point where it turns decisive. Decisive for white, that is. A top move here, I let this one sit for a bit, and computer has its eye on rook b7. It's prepared to play where this pawn is simply tracked down like this, and it wants to focus on this a file. Now, something stuck out to me about this position, and that is this knight on b6 may seem odd, but doesn't have a great move now. Black has nice control over the a file. Maybe both rooks are positioned on the second and third ranks like this. This point is secure. This file is open for the white rook, but if the knight can't move, there are no entry points on b7, b8. We, in a weird way, kind of come to a standstill. There could maybe be these h4, h5, h4 ideas trying to punch a hole, create some weakness in white's camp. We sort of come to a standstill in a position like this. White's up a pawn, but how do you actually make great progress from here? Interesting line. Computer-like, for sure. Now, how it's played out here, black tries to hang on to this pawn for a little bit more, plays with b3, knight b4, challenging the knight straight away, trying to remove the blockader of this passed pawn, also increased pressure on d5. Black's try from here is with f4, sort of a lashing out attempt at this stage. It is losing at this point for black. I should point out here, with that b3 move, that was move 28, about 15 minutes remaining for both players, and a good chunk of time here spent by Pranav, about 7 minutes. He finds a top move here, ends up playing queen b2. Now, if you try to play in a different way, this is where you could easily see the advantage thrown away if you're not precise at this moment right here. If you try to go ahead and bank some material, you would be allowing your opponent counterplay. You'd be sort of off balance. What do I mean by this? Well, if the response to f4 was this material grab on d5, at the end of this line, we're going to see that white will be kind of off balance. First of all, how would you recapture here on e3? If you take with the knight, this is what I'm talking about, queen f4. Active queen, pin on the knight, pressure on d4, possible rook a2, problems on the second rank. Active posts available to black, pressure on white's camp. There is compensation for the pawn. Also, if you recapture with the queen, there's queen d8, pressure here, there. If you defend the knight, there's pressure here as well. There's a pin. You sort of end up kind of stuck here as white. How exactly do you make progress exactly? It's not completely clear. It's calling this about equal, even though white is up a pawn, even though white has connected passed pawns. Okay, how it's played out in this one, white finds the top response, plays queen b2 here, targets the rook, and sidesteps this idea of pawn takes pawn with tempo. That 7 minutes of calculation pays off because the remainder of this game is a lot of white just swiping material. Only at this point do we take on d5. Knights exchanged, No in-betweener in this case. Pawn takes pawn. We're not hitting the queen. The black queen must react in this case. And she can't react in a way where she puts pressure on e3, for instance. The knight has control over that. So we're on the queen. We're on f4. White is cleaning house at this stage. Black's attempt at this point, some lashing out try. He goes with g5. Serious concession. These two are now holes. The knight hops into one of them. Possible checkmates nearby. Why would you want to play such a move? Well, the knight from f4 was controlling g2. Black has this idea to do what? Increase pressure on the second rank. This is nearby. But one patient move, simple enough, king h1, meeting rook a8 to a2 with rook g1. Things are cool on g2. No further pressure available to black. And he tries something, queen a5, some active move, but this is where white pounces in a very forceful way. In comes knight f6 check. Queen takes, pawn check. Another check. And you could, of course, take the knight right here, but what would be better is to take that knight with check. And you can force that. Queen d6 check, only move. King e8. Now the knight is down for the count. Another check flicked in. And finally, the passed pawn is won. And black resigns. There's a mate threat nearby. No counterplay for black, not even a single check for black. There are multiple checks for white, on the other hand. And to point out a mating continuation here for white, let's say, I don't know, the game continued with rook a1, trying to do something on white's back rank. There isn't a flight square yet. Yeah, white is there first. Rook b8. And you would have to block with the queen to delay mate for as long as possible. You could always just win the queen for free. And if the king stepped up in this position, queen d6 is mate in both cases. All right, in this one, though, after the b pawn was collected, black ends up resigning. So a nice game here, nice focus on the queenside and creating passed pawns connected or otherwise, and then trying to work with those passed pawns. Anyhow, what are your thoughts on this one? Feel free, as usual, to leave any feedback to this video in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed it and maybe took a thing or two away. That's all for now. Take care.